Okay, well, here we are. So excited to dig in. Thanks for being here, Jake.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, this is the part where we kind of like fill people in, and we obviously know how we met and all that stuff. And I know so much of your history and why one of those conversations we're just talking about. But I felt like it would be fun to talk about like your story and how you got where you are mixed in with like how we met in that journey. Cause I keep reflecting like I'll let you share, but like I can't get over the coincidence like where we first met and who we first were and like how our journeys and like paths have coincided. So big question, but would you want to just dig in there with telling us sort of like who you are and how you got here?
Sounds good.
Great.
My name is Jake Pardee. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and very proud of that.
Yeah.
Um,
Go Texas.
I moved there when I was young, and my parents are not from Houston, so I feel like there's a thread of adaptability that started being woven into my story from a young age. 'Cause it was the community that I grew up in Houston was very different than where we had come from in Connecticut, and where my parents had spent their lives at that point. And my mom was a dancer. She signed me up for dance class when I was in fourth grade, which was the beginning of um, my practice of performing arts, we'll say. I
Yeah.
was singing, dancing, and acting in most of my free time from like sixth grade through 12th grade. Um, like you, and a little bit different from you, looking at college was like, do I want to go to a conservatory program? Should I just go to a liberal arts school and major in drama?
Yeah.
Um, I ultimately decided to do the latter, which ended up not happening. But as you know, getting into intro to drama at Vassar was very competitive.
So competitive.
Did not get in my first semester, so the moment that we met was as close to that as I got, which was our first semester freshman writing seminar. I don't remember the proper name of the course, but it was a Chekhov class,
I think it was Theater of Chekhov.
theater of Chekhov.
Like, which is like a weird name. It's very Vassar, but that's like what I've called it in my head.
Yeah, that I
Yeah.
mean, that's what it was.
Yeah, that's what it was. And so like there we were together, like 9 a.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays, an ungodly hour, just like for me, like fighting for my life to be awake.
Truly.
And it's just so like, yeah, the fact that we spent like a significant amount of time together, like in our formative experiences and like had similar friend groups, but just like did not like meet as those versions. I think that's so funny.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question. Theater kid, I'm so like just like going off. What was your like favorite childhood like musical? Like what was your like soundtrack?
um, I mean, just from like I think this was partially like because I was the youngest kid
Yeah.
in like with a bunch of cool older kids. My
Ooh,
memories of doing year in town are
ooh,
near and dear to me. That was like so fun.
nice.
But it's hard not to say Footloose. Footloose was like
Oh,
the
that's
big
fun. Yeah.
one when I
Yeah.
was in high school. So
I love that. Footloose is one of the first movies, I think possibly the first movie I saw myself, like when they redid it in theaters. I remember I was home from like a college break,
yeah.
and like we have like those very limited like 3 days to like be at home,
Mhm.
do wherever you go. And no one wanted to come with me. I was just like, I'm gonna go see it by myself in theaters. And I felt very like brave for
Yeah.
doing it. And then Urinetown is one of those ones that I am not familiar with, but I know like as a theater kid, like we did that thing where we pretend we know all the musicals and we're like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, I've totally seen that. But
Mhm.
it's a very big maturity and growth point that I can just admit I've not seen because it's like what I wouldn't have done as a kid. So interrupting, but okay, so we're together in theater of Chekhov. It's freshman year. You were gonna go to a conservatory, possibly, then went to liberal arts, similar journey to me. And yeah, what's going on freshman year for Jake?
Well, a parallel thread that gets woven in at that point is another sort of accidental one, which is my job in the scene shop with Paul O'Connor, King of Kings, Paul O'Connor.
Uh,
Um, the job was actually called tour guide slash technical trainee.
hmm.
And I wanted to be an admissions tour guide, but they didn't need any new tour guides. So I was like, all right, well, I'll give tours somewhere else. So I go for the interview. I walk into Paul's shop and he's like, yeah, I don't know why it's called that. There's never once been a tour that we give.
Yeah, literally. I'm like, what tour? Like,
Yeah,
of what?
yeah. But he had great vibes and he
Yeah.
was playing good music in his shop. And I was like, all right, like, let's see what this is about. And that was my first technical theater experience. The work was uh, supporting him as the technical theater director in building the sets for all the drama department shows. So each semester there would be, I don't know, 3 department shows
Yeah.
plus a senior theses, maybe, or did those count in? I don't know.
I think it's all really changed because there
Yeah.
were some semesters, like by the time that we were seniors, like I feel like there were like 4 senior shows and 1 department show, and it's just all mixed up. But yeah, lots of sets and lots
Yeah.
of it's always going on. Yeah.
So I was still doing some theater. I was doing a cappella freshman year and working in the scene shop. And sophomore year, as I was beginning to accept that I wasn't going to become a drama major,
Mm,
I took a sociology class, intro to sociology, a social justice approach with Eileen Leonard, who became my advisor.
yeah.
And it was a big kind of moment of bubble popping for me,
Yeah.
um, just based on the multiple compounding sources of privilege that I grew up with. I hadn't really thought or studied that deeply the liberation and freedom movements that we talked about in that class, looked at a lot of different sort of identity based dynamics of oppression. And I kind of had this moment of like, oh shit, like, I got to do something about this. I feel some guilt that it took me this long to even start considering it.
Mm,
Um, and I think also the social culture of Vassar really contributed to a feeling of like, all right, well, like, get in the mix here. Like, where are you going to plug in?
yeah. 100%.
Um, so, given that I was already spending a certain amount of time in my job doing set design and construction,
Yeah.
the place to create space to start doing some more student organizing stuff was stop going to rehearsal, right? So I sophomore year was the last show that I was in at Vassar, and I was like, I don't know. In hindsight, I think that there maybe could have been an opportunity to better balance and complement those two interests. But at the time, it sort of felt like, oh, I need to drop this so that I can pick this up because it's about damn time.
Yeah, and to your point about, we're also like, have to remember we're 20 years old, or like 19 is what we feel like we're about 30 because of the Vassar kind of culture, but like you're still young, you're still figuring these out. And like I think that's so Vassar of like that all or nothing feeling. And I feel like in all of that there's so much, but like when you said I was coming to terms with not being a drama major, that like hit me so much in the
Yeah,
heart. I think like that I feel like maybe a lot of liberal arts students, but certainly a lot of Vassar students have that kind of like, oh, I'm not gonna do what I said I was gonna do here feeling. And
mm-hmm.
the campus kind of changes when your lens on it changes. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my God, there are buildings that are not Vogelstein. Like, what's this building? Like, I didn't go into SWIFT or history building until I was like in senior year. I was like, what's this?
Yeah,
But like that it sounds like that pull we talked about like towards social justice and unpacking and unraveling like your history was so strong, but like what was it like to like let go of theater in that way at that time, like with that
yeah.
passion?
I mean, one thing that I was noticing in the moment was just like, thank God I didn't go to a conservatory program because I would have burnt out
Mm,
immediately.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
As you get like into graduate level, undergraduate level, but college level, like performing arts, like you start to see, okay, there's some people who are like, this is what I'm gonna do. I
Right.
know how miserable it might be at times, but like I have been called and I'm answering the call. And I
Yeah.
was like, that is not where I'm at.
Yeah.
Something that I love, that I've gotten so much out of. And I think another thing that I started to see is like one thing that in hindsight is so clear to me is being a part of a collective with a shared vision was so exciting to me, right?
Yeah.
It's bigger than a sports team to be in a cast
Mm,
of a musical.
and
It's like,
amen.
yeah, uh,
Yes. Anger all the football fans out there.
right. Um, and like the presence that it demands.
Yeah.
I feel like there was just sort of a adrenaline that came with the heightened presence of performance and the feeling of being an important part of a well-functioning whole
Yeah.
that I have since seen exists in other places.
Mm,
So that itch has been scratched in some ways. Um,
love that.
I think that's a dot that I connected later on after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I have a question about like authenticity in theater and like Paul scene shot, but I almost like I want to like let people catch up to like what the rest of the story before I
Sure, sure,
ask.
sure.
I feel like the dots connecting, like I don't like I want to like let people
Yeah.
have a full picture. So yeah, I'll like
Okay.
myself my questions and let you like keep going there.
Okay. Well seen. So I graduated, and by that time, I was like, the most important thing is for me to find a job at an organization whose politics align with mine.
Yeah.
So I got a job at a nonprofit doing arts and social justice work, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed,
Yeah.
ready to make a
Yeah.
difference,
Yeah.
getting paid hardly anything. Um, and much to my surprise, my team was filled with people in their late 20s and 30s who were either burning or burnt out already
Mhm.
from their nonprofit careers. I quickly started to see, the dynamics that led them to develop these perspectives of kind of cynicism and self-preservation. Some of them were specific to the leadership where I worked. A lot of them were endemic to the nonprofit industry, honestly. And a story for another time, that organization dissolved and imploded. And about 2 years later, I was, figuring out what was next.
Mm. Mhm.
Um, Still believing that I could find a better nonprofit with a better role that is sustainable. Um, then COVID happens. I'm moving across the country for a relationship that ended up, we decided to split up. I was in a new place, not finding work, feeling frustrated by the nonprofit path.
Okay.
And the coaching seed was planted by my brother's former coach, who I was talking to about some other climate justice job searching. And he was
Okay.
like, "You ever thought about coaching?" And I was like, "No, that's insane. I would never do that."
Interesting. So you weren't like I don't think I knew it. So you weren't like being coached. You're just talking about coaching.
Yeah. I remember he like my brother sent it to me during COVID. He did like a few free coaching workshops,
Okay.
and I went to one of them. But I was talking to him about finding a job in climate justice,
Yeah.
and he must have heard something in what I was saying that led him to be like, "You ever thought about that?"
Yeah. And like looking back at that moment, starting to look like in the dots, and like I promise I'll let you finish the story, but like, do you kind of have you reflected on what you think like he might have seen in that moment, or like have you asked or like asked
Hmm.
yourself or him what that was?
Wow, I would love to ask him. I should do
Yeah,
that.
you should.
I, I mean, the short and literal answer I would say is a book called Emergent Strategy by
Mm.
Adrienne Marie Brown.
Oh, I love her. Yeah.
Yeah, that I had just completely latched onto because it really articulated a lot of what the issues with the nonprofit that I was working at were. Um, so I was like facilitating book clubs for emergent strategy and just like thinking it in a way that I now see is very aligned with the principles of coaching. It's a lot about you know, focusing on what you can control, um, being iterative and experimental, and focusing on small sweet steps. Um, and I think I might be making this up, but I think Adrienne Marie Brown is an alum of the coaching program that he did, which is the one that I ended up doing.
Oh my God, that's a great thread.
So that's probably the most literal connective tissue there. But it was many months after he said that where I was finally willing to be like, okay, well, my initial reaction is that's insane. I wonder why that's insane, and
And
maybe it's not.
yeah, why did it feel insane? Like we're gonna get into a little later, but also right now, like what were those kind of initial thoughts and like what were your preconceived notions about coaching before you became
Yeah.
a coach? Yeah.
Um, First, that it wasn't real.
Same. Yeah, absolutely. It's like it's very woo-woo, it's very goop. It's like no.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't even know if I like seriously considered what he was saying enough to be like, that's insane. If I was just like, okay, that's not an option.
Yeah.
Um, what else? What was the rest of your question? Sorry.
No, just like your thoughts on coaching and like why did it
Oh,
feel like crazy?
yeah. Um, I thought that it was, I really did not understand what it was, is what I'm finding myself saying right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't ask until later. But because it was not one of the paths that had been clearly laid out for me already, I
Mm,
was like, it's not a thing.
right. Yeah.
And
I,
it's never more true than in our early 20s that we are so impacted by the things that we are seeing and hearing happening around us. And we think that that is the extent of the world that we live in.
exactly. Yeah. I think it also like connects to your awakening. I'm thinking about this transition, like from nonprofit to coaching in your kind of transition from theater to nonprofit. And like, I do think that nonprofit careers are a little bit more visible than coaching careers, but at
Yeah,
the same time, at 19 or 20 years old, I'm sure you look back and you weren't probably familiar with like all the careers in nonprofit and like what that was. And so I feel like in a weird way, figuring out like what the broader scope of the world around you is like another form of like cracking on privilege and figuring things out. Like
sure.
the idea of like understanding just how big the world is and just how many things you can do with your gifts and talents, like is a form of privilege, I think, to
Yep,
be exposed to all of that.
absolutely.
Yeah. And I think like it's like a bit of a tangent, but like you can like look at these three roads of like, I don't know, like doctor, lawyer, teacher, or whatever, and like go down a road that feels successful and feels like I've done the thing. And you can have this like financial privilege or whatever. That if you look back and you're just like, oh, I never had the time to like explore, like there's like I just think the layers of privilege are like so many. There's financial, there's mental, there's like just all of the just like it's such a good point that like if we can't see it, we're not gonna like go down that road, and that can like quite literally change your life as it changed yours.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well put.
Yeah. Thanks. So you are with this coach. He tells you to think about coaching and what happens next.
Um, I'm like, let's do it. I really had a good vibe from him. I looked into the program that he did, which is the one that I did, which is the Academy for Coaching Excellence.
Yeah.
And I was also crunching some numbers comparing coach training with grad school. And
Mm.
spoiler alert, way cheaper.
Yes, that
Um,
is so true.
and shorter and compatible with working a full-time job at the same time. So I just sort of like started seeing how doable this was.
Okay.
And at the time I wasn't like, I'm going to go all the way in on this, but let me take the first course, which is the prerequisite for the program. And I feel like the other piece that I maybe glossed over in my story to getting coaching was right before I found it, I had made peace with the idea that I wasn't going to find a job that I love.
Ooh.
I was like, most people don't find that. Labor can just be labor, and I can have a life that I love and a job that allows me to live that.
Okay.
And that was like a big breakthrough for me because
Yeah.
like this whole like how tightly I was clinging to nonprofits with missions that were aligned with my politics was a way of me trying to realize work that I love.
Hmm.
And I was finally willing to be like, you know what? Maybe I won't find that. And that's okay because there's a lot of other things in life and I can sort of have a more utilitarian view of my labor. As
Interesting.
soon as I let go of that, I found coaching, which I love.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I think again,
Uh,
like it's impossible for me not to see these parallels between your transitions of like the minute that you were okay with not being a drama major, you
yeah,
find this major that's more compatible. The minute you're okay with not loving what you do, you find what you love. And like spoiler alert, Jake is a coach now and like does all these
yeah,
things. So it's like that's so interesting too, the idea of like not knowing what's around the corner
right.
and like that release is super interesting.
Yeah. I can't promise that everyone will have the same experience that I have of finding it immediately upon releasing it.
Yeah, and it
But
also wasn't like, we're telling a story in like, an hour here, but like it also wasn't immediate. You
no,
were like, you didn't quit your job and just go all in. Like which is okay to do too. Like you started taking this course.
mm,
It was in the pandemic, which is a time
yeah,
I think a lot of people were reevaluating, and you also like still had your job. You were kind of testing the waters.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
And like what made you like, did you like this guy? You were like, okay, let's do it. But at the same time, you're trying this, but you also don't know the coaching is real. So what
Mhm.
kind of made you like take that step and like press the button and like enroll after kind of thinking, well, this might not be real?
I was transformed by the content of the first course that I took.
Ooh.
Um, I won't turn this into a plug for that course, but the basic premise of it is like it's not just for coaches, but if you want to become a coach, you can't coach someone past a point that you yourself have not gone past.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of like experiential exercises in seeing where your growth edges are,
Mm-hmm.
getting curious about what's on the other side of them, and learning tools and skills for crossing that boundary.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
a 4 day intensive, Thursday through Sunday, 9 hour days on Zoom. And 4 days later, I was like, transformed not into a new person, but a more authentic version of myself, I would say. Like I had become more myself through going through that experience. And I
Yeah.
was kind of like, I need to support other people to be doing this. Like the fact that I had been able to experience it, I was like, let me pay this forward.
I love that. I love that. The like not being a new person, but being more yourself. And like literally in such a short and not short time going from this seems not real. Let's try this out. Oh,
Yeah.
wait, this is magic.
Yeah.
Like, let's go. Like I've had people talk to me about coaching and I'll talk to them and they're like, you talk about like it's magic. And I'm like, I kind of think it is. And I think it's really fun to talk to somebody who like wasn't all in from the get-go because again like this time last year I was just like what is this, so I think it's kind of
Yeah.
fun to go from skeptic to like let's go.
Totally.
I love that idea of like becoming a more authentic version of yourself, and there are so many places we could go from there, but I feel like what has, and I guess just fill in like the quick gaps of like, so you say you want to be a coach, you go to coaching school, you like catch us up on like where that was to where you are today in like a few
Yeah.
seconds. Yeah.
So I was working a day job for about 2 years while I was year and a half while I was taking the courses, getting my hours to get my credential from the ICF.
Yeah.
And I was actually, I took a big road trip last summer, 2 months on the road, partially to, heal some heartbreak
Mm.
um, and just reconnect with my people because they live all over, which is so annoying.
I
Um,
know, like after college, it's like, why didn't you all just like stay in one place? It's very inconvenient.
so I had a job at the time that allowed me to take that trip. I actually had to switch my day job because I had a very in-person day job, and I was like, I want to be on the road for 2 months. So how do I do that? So I got another day job, and while I was on the trip, everyone's like, "How's the new job?" And I was like, "It's great because I'm on this trip right now."
Okay, what was that job?
It was at a recruiting firm doing internal communications.
Okay, so now you kind of have like followed that track in your mind of like, I'm gonna do this coaching thing, but also I'm gonna just kind of do the work I need to as
Right.
I'm doing that. Okay,
Right.
and in time, were you at this point thinking I'm gonna go into coaching full time, or were you just like, I'm gonna do the job I need to do to like support the life I need to?
I was pretty clear that coaching was going to be the thing.
Okay,
Um, I set a goal with my mentor coach at the beginning of 2023 that at some point in 2024, I was
yeah.
going to focus full time energy on my coaching practice.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
realizing like how hard it is sometimes to like have conversations. I know like where it ends. I'm like I have to tell
yeah,
let Jake tell his story.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But you're back on the road trip.
yeah,
You're hanging out with your friends. You're like, how do you like this job? And you're like
yeah.
saying,
I'm like, it's great because I'm here right now in
yeah,
Los Angeles or Colorado, whatever. And then
yeah.
I got back and people were like, so how's the new job? And I'm like, well, I'm not on the trip anymore.
Mm.
I kind of hate it actually. Now that you mentioned it, I really am depressed by it. And I think there's an added toll of because I was so clear on what I could have been doing with time that would contribute to my coaching business.
Mm.
It wasn't just like if I was just in a job that I hated, it would be boring and annoying. But there was an added layer of like, I could, if I had more time and space, I could be like experimenting with new offerings for my clients. I could be trying to build my network in different ways.
Yeah.
Um, so I had a call with my cousin September of last year, and she's a few years younger than me. She's probably like 23 at the time,
Mhm.
and she was like telling me about her decision to quit her job working for a music industry agency and give her music a shot. And
Nice.
I was just on the phone with her, just like, this is so awesome. Like, this is going to have positive ripple effects in all elements of your life. Like, I'm so proud of you and so glad you've seen this. And I hung up the phone and I was like, I really needed to hear a lot of that.
Mm.
And at that moment, I was like, okay, let me just fucking try this, you know? Um, I did a little bit of math, gave myself a little bit of a cushion, decided that in December I would have my last day at my day job. And here I am 5 months later, fresh on the journey of building a coaching business.
Yes, building it, but also like living it.
Yeah,
Like
right.
you just got off a client call and you have another one after this, like
True.
doing the thing. And so, thank you, first of all, for giving us that story so in depth. And like, I know I paused a lot, but I'm so glad that we got to like go into just different twists and turns, like be on that journey with you. What has coaching taught you about authenticity? Like in the day to day from your clients, like what have you learned about authenticity itself and what it means to you and your authentic self?
Yeah. When I was thinking about this in preparation for the conversation, I was struggling.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure why I was struggling because it is a big part of the work that I do with my clients. And something sort of clicked for me, which is when I talk about authenticity with clients and as I have been coached, it is almost always in one context,
Oh,
which is authentic action.
okay.
That there is, their authenticity is something that you know it when you feel it, right? Like each of us has wisdom and dreams and a desire to make a difference, and these sort of form the context of our authenticity. But the most powerful way that I've found of relating to it is looking at the question, well, given who I am or given who you are,
Mhm.
what would someone who is that do next? Right? That taking action that is aligned with who you are and what's important to you is how you demonstrate authenticity. And the experience of doing that is one that A feels really good,
Yeah.
like for your heart, right? This is how your heart wants you to be acting.
Mm.
And 99 times out of 100, it is also good for the world. It's
Yeah,
a
like
contribution.
with your cousin, I think it was. You mentioned a minute ago,
Yeah,
like, yeah, like with that and like with your journey. Yeah,
right.
going, yeah.
So, there's a couple different like there's sort of two types of authentic action that I usually coach with and talk about. Type one is clearing up unfinished business.
Hmm.
It's more of like it creates relief. Like, okay, I've been worried about my toothache and I haven't scheduled my dentist appointment. The authentic action is I'm going to schedule the appointment.
Okay, so unfinished business, like something that you don't really like maybe want to do, but like this is going to be good for me.
It's not necessarily fun, but it provides relief and it releases energy that you can
Mm,
focus somewhere else, which brings us to type two, which is an action that's focused on a goal or a vision, right? These are the ones that bring us joy and a sense of accomplishment, which is like, you know what? Like, I've seen that I want to run this 10K. So I am going to hire a trainer next week. That's my action. Or I by this weekend I'm going to write the first 3 pages of my novel. Right, like whatever it is a action that you take in physical reality. It's not just a takeaway in your head.
yeah.
Demonstration of who you are and what's important to you in a way that you can then look back at and be like, I did that. Right, that's me.
Wow. I feel like I'm being coached right now. I'm just like looking up my life and scanning, and I'm like, that's so cool. And like the way I can see using that with your clients and like the way you've used that in your life and just like, yeah. And going back a step, I guess, like in thinking about authentic action, like what is the step before that for someone who's kind
Mhm.
of just like, I don't know,
Yeah,
figuring out, like, I guess it kind of ties into my other question for you, like with, so we know what authenticity means to you now. You've gone through coaching, gone through this journey, but then looking back to like, we're both like, I would say in our 20s, we're like both in our late 20s. I don't know if you do this thing where I like say in my 20s, like I'm not 20 anymore. It's like, you still have a little while. Like I'm only 29, but in my head, I'm 40. In your mid and earlier 20s, what did authenticity mean to you or not mean to you?
mm,
And how
yeah.
does that influence, like, I know you work with 20 somethings a lot too. And
Mm-hmm.
so like how does that influence the way that you try to like translate all of this to somebody a little bit like earlier on? Because I think the way you
Yeah,
explain authenticity and or don't explain it to a 23-year-old versus like a 40-year-old is very
sure.
different, even though authenticity is the same, like, well, not the same, it's different both of them, but it's equally important. So
Yeah.
yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that when I was reflecting on what authenticity meant to me in my early 20s, I think I wasn't curious about uncovering my own authentic self. I think the way that I was thinking about and relating to authenticity was almost like a lens through which to view other people and other institutions
Oh, it's
as like
interesting.
almost, oh, sorry, what'd you say?
It's interesting.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry. Yeah, yeah.
but I was breaking up.
No, 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 you're so good. Sorry. I'm just like, I feel like I like have to get better at like not like responding verbally. And I'm just like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Almost like a litmus test where I'm like, oh, well, are they being authentic? And like, is that really authentic? And it was very outwardly focused.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that I had maybe like a developing political consciousness that I would have pointed to as like, this is who I am.
Yeah.
In hindsight, it's not. It is, the politics that I engage with. But it wasn't until probably until I was, I guess, going through some heartbreak and some soul searching was at the beginning of finding it, but especially in the beginning of this coaching program, it's almost like a getting curious about who my authentic self is for the first time.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like the other reason why I was having trouble looking at it at first is because I feel like we discover what is authentic not by looking for it, but by like experiencing it, being like, oh, I just said this thing or did this thing, and it kind of like it kind of lit me up a little bit inside.
Okay. Yeah.
So with clients, I have some, I mean, I have an exercise that's a lot about like who are the people you admire, what do you admire about them, uh, the fact that you have seen in those people those qualities means that they are within you. This is your core values. I can tell by the face that you're making that you have something similar. And another one that's sort of more focused on what are the types of contributions that you would most love to make to the world.
Yeah.
And these are compasses, right? Because you can say, okay, well, one of the intentions of my life is to be a loving family member. So given what we just looked at in this session, given the takeaway that you just named, what would someone who is a loving family member do next?
Mm.
Because not only does that, like, it feels good to do it, it is a contribution. There's the flip side of how good it feels to do things that are authentic is the toll that it takes to continue not doing them.
I was literally just going to ask you, like, what does inauthenticity feel like, if that's what authenticity is? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Great
also,
question.
like, that's such a good, like, also, like, how that's also good. Like, I could say a million things about that, but it's just like all of that was so good. And I do have similar thing like exercise with like people you admire
Yeah.
and like just all of this is so good. So yes, inauthenticity, how does that feel?
I think that it has stages of metabolism and it sort of evolves. So I think the first way it shows up is as like frustration.
Mm-hmm.
You're frustrated with something that you did or didn't do. And maybe you don't yet see it that way. Maybe you're like, oh, I'm frustrated by this person. But it's like, well, maybe you're frustrated with the way that you responded to the person or something. Like there's some indication that you acted incoherently with what's important to you.
Ooh, yeah. Okay.
Frustration, if unaddressed, right? Maybe there's a type one authentic action that we can take out of frustration that will relieve it, right? I don't like how I handled that thing. I want to send them a note and say, hey, I'm sorry, but whatever.
Yeah.
Frustration unaddressed, I think, evolves into or devolves into cynicism
Hmm.
and a real perspective of like, this is the way things are, like from a sort of the inverse of possibility. Like, what's the point? Um, there's still a little bit of heat in cynicism, though. Like, you might kind of be like aggressively cynical. Resignation is the final form,
Ooh.
where there isn't even that heat anymore, right? It's just like, what's the point? This is the way things are. This is the way people are.
Yeah. Talk us back into that, like, because I could see like there's the audio, I could see me talking about that heat, like that's like we don't want to be cynical, like some, but like something about the way you described that heat feels like there was something like there that like dulled for the resignation. Can you take us back into that just a little bit? Like the it almost feels like there's something we can do there or like identify
Yeah.
there. Like I feel like all
Well,
this, yeah, go ahead.
one thing that I'm often saying in coaching sessions when a client is describing an experience of frustration
Yes.
is that's a great sign
Yes.
because
Yes.
it means that you know how you want to be behaving. You've seen that you're not doing it, but if you didn't see that, you wouldn't be frustrated.
Right.
That heat, it comes from a recognition that what you're talking about is inauthenticity.
Yeah. And it's kind of like a alarm bell in some
Yeah.
ways. Like the heat is a good thing because it's just like you don't want to be frustrated and cynical. You're like, well, it's like with negative emotions. I don't like the word negative emotions, but like they teach us things. It's like, oh, okay, we're frustrated, like you said, because we don't want to behave this way. And it's like we can do something there. And I'm thinking about like with theater almost, like if you hate a show, like let's hear why you hate this show versus like whatever. Like I would much more hear about what bothers you so much than like the apathy of just like I didn't care about it. And so
Yeah.
like it feels like the heat and that frustration and cynicism is like a more malleable, like fertile place to be. And then we get to resignation, and that feels like kind of the final frontier of like this is like the stage three almost. I feel like we're in like a science like cycle, like in this way that I love. And so like what is the resignation feel like? What's the texture of that?
It's heavy. It is it's sedentary.
Okay.
It's apathetic. And it's usually also fortified by intricate structures of justification and analysis.
Ooh, wait, say that again.
It's fortified by intricate structures of justification and analysis.
I love that. I feel like the wordsmith in me is just like having this conversation with that. So it's fortified by the intricate structures of justification and analysis. Like that makes immediate sense to me, but like break that down.
Well, another way into it is I don't know if it's Adrienne Rue Brown's wisdom, but she definitely includes it in her books. What you pay attention to grows.
Yeah.
And if you have reached resignation and you have this structure that you've built, you've spent so much attention on justifying all of the maybe very legitimate reasons why you have become resigned, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of fucked up shit. And it is very easy to assemble evidence of that in a way that makes resignation a logical response to it.
Yeah.
So by spending the time and energy building that structure, you bury yourself even deeper in it
Yeah.
because it is a reflection of how focused you've been
Mm.
on all of the reasons to be resigned.
Yeah.
When if you're willing, you can choose to focus elsewhere on what is authentic for you.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah. It's just like I can literally see that physical structure of like you've kind of like burrowed yourself in this
Yeah.
way. I feel like my mind was just blown a little
Yeah,
bit.
I've never said it in those words before. I'm also kind of like I'm
It's
like, wow,
that's
that makes a lot of sense.
no, but that's like very hard for me to believe because you say this so authentically, but you say this with the like clarity of someone who's like clearly defined this structure and like is giving a TED talk on it. Like you need to like this is I'm glad that we're recording and we have this for you so
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
like come back to it. But you literally say this like somebody who has like cemented this process.
Mm.
Like that's so good and so cool. And like so yeah, how do we start to like break down that structure? Like, what do you do? Like, I mean, first of all, is somebody who's in that sedentary, heavy, fortified, intricate structure of justification analysis. Like, I want that like on like a postcard, like a hat. So it's my favorite phrase ever. Like, is that person gonna like is that a person that's gonna kind of like willingly want to like come to coaching, or is that someone who's gonna like have it found a different way? Like what does that kind of look like in the real like in a more little less literary sense? And like
Yeah,
yeah, like do you work with those kinds of people? Have you seen those kinds of people? Like what is like that?
I think those kinds of people are not ready for coaching yet
Mm.
because one of the things that I saw and was transformed by in that course that I mentioned was a recognition of what it is to be willing.
Mm.
That as like a choice that we have, right? Um, if you're not willing to do something, that's fine. Maybe there's good reasons why. Ultimately, you're willing to be not willing.
Ooh. You're willing to be not willing.
Like if I'm like I'm not willing to apologize to that person,
Mm.
It's like, okay, maybe they've hurt you and you're not willing to. But ultimately, like, you could choose to be willing. And I'm not saying you should.
Yeah.
The recognition of, at the time, I had been having a lot of very frustrating conversations with people in my family and extended family about political issues that I cared a lot about. And what clicked for me is you can't make someone willing.
You can't make someone willing. If we all accepted that, like how different would our lives be, like me included.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's I don't know, I listen to a lot of podcasts, so I'm like, I don't know who said this.
Mhm.
It either a Brene Brown podcast or Glennon Doyle, like some guest they had on was like, how would you behave if you believed this person was doing their best?
Mhm.
And I feel like for me, that was like, well, I can't convince you
Yeah.
it's a better person.
Yeah.
I can't, and that's like subjective. Like, I can't convince you to my way. I can't convince you not to hurt me. And it's like, how would you behave?
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
The way that I think about that question using the language of willingness is I can't make someone willing. I can show up in a way that would make it as easy as possible for them to choose to be willing.
Yeah.
Like, what would it look like for me to come into this space in a way in which they might suddenly become willing
Yeah.
and recognizing I can't control whether or not they do. So, for somebody who is fortified in that bunker of whether it's resignation or cynicism,
Yeah.
they're not coming to coaching.
Mm.
And I think that their path out of the bunker is lined with people who are willing and people who are authentic, right? There is something, like, I keep gesturing back to the heart here of like behaving authentically feels really good and it opens your heart.
Yeah.
And that's contagious. Like, there is something about that bunker that I feel like a person has been willing to close their heart such that they end up there. And it doesn't happen all at once, but I think that by interacting with people whose hearts are open and who are taking authentic action, we can start to see what that makes possible for us and those around us.
Yeah. I just love that. I'm like, and just the idea of willingness, the idea of choice. I'm thinking about like the idea of there's no one-way liberation and like what it is to like experience when being authentic around us and
Yeah.
like to kind of, like, okay, maybe you're in this bunker, maybe someone drops a book off to you in the bunker, maybe you read Adrienne Reed Brown, like
Yeah.
that looks like, and it kind of just shows you that there are many steps to authenticity and like you don't necessarily have to be ready to dive into coaching for that to be the thing.
Yeah. Another connection that I'm seeing here for the first time, I'll bring it back to Paul's shop
Yes. Yes.
and emergent strategy, because I can't help not doing that.
Yeah.
One of the principles of emergent strategy is fractals, right? How we are at the small scale is how we are at the large scale.
Mm.
And something that I got from working with Paul is how an understanding of how much it matters to, down to the smallest details, practice authenticity. So in the context of a show, there is a who, what, when, where, why provided. And you sort of like dramaturgically unpack that to figure out, okay, so this is what the set should like, this is what the prop should be like, whatever. And Paul is like, okay, today we're putting the third layer of molding on the dining room set, which is just a 3-line scene in Act 2.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a big proscenium theater. I don't know if anyone in the audience is going to notice this molding at all.
Paul's gonna notice.
Paul's going to notice, and something happens for the crew, for the actors for, the whole that is being made
Mhm.
when at the smallest scale, authenticity is being practiced, right? It changes the relationships between that one detail and the other details and the other people who encounter it. So it's not to say that like by doing that you will transform the show, but it's a recognition that, it is through small interactions that some pretty big transformations can start to occur, especially when those small interactions are happening simultaneously and are, coordinated in some way, which theater is like such a brilliant exercise in.
Literally. Yeah.